The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. Recently, the Supreme Court paved the way for the city of New York to prohibit church groups from renting space in public schools. This has rankled many in the Bronx, including tonight's guest, a councilman who got arrested protesting the ban. Also, is the city doing the right thing when it comes to the Kingsbridge Armory and the compromise on living wage? There's also guns and crime and a number of other issues to talk about with our guest and with you too. We welcome your questions or comments. You can join the conversation at 718-960-7241. You can also email comments to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. But here in the studio, the councilman from the 14th Council District in the Bronx, Fernando Cabrera. Good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Well, I gave the little menu there. We got a lot to talk about, and undoubtedly we won't have enough time.
It's been a while, so we need to catch up.
Why is it so important to you that church groups be able to use public schools?
You know, we're not asking for a favor. We're asking for fairness. Last year, over 10,000 nonprofit applications were submitted, including churches, which were about 160 applications, 68 churches and houses of worship, including Jewish, Mosque, Christian, Catholic, Baha'i faith, made their applications in, and they were able to congregate. They've been there for the last 16 years. They're not intruding on anyone else's rights. We're talking about the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of gathering in public spaces. I think the mayor got a bit confused in terms of having a secular government, which we do, but we don't have a secular society. The courts did not mandate for these houses of worship to leave. They left it to the option of the mayor to decide, or to any city. And we're tragically, Gary, we're the only school district in America, the only city in America, the only state in America where such a practice is taking place, and people across the nation are appalled at this. They're shocked. I was thinking about the other day, Gary. The other day we had Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. Remember his legacy. And I thought about the fact that even back then, he was not even dealing with this form of discrimination, and yet it seems like we're regressing instead of progressing.
In addition to the protests, I know you're working as hard as you can on the various legislative angles on this. Have you had a conversation with either the mayor or his staff or even the speaker on these things? And what do they tell you as to why they want to do this?
Basically, the mayor's position, I have spoken to some of his staff, close staff. Their position is that somehow students going to come in a weekend, which will be an amazing thing to have a student come in a weekend, because I know children, they're too busy having fun in the weekend. They don't want to be in school. But somehow they would just stumble into school and say, wow, this is not a school, that this is a church. And somehow they were going to be confused. But here's the double standard, and if I may, here's the hypocrisy of the whole thing. Because right now the New York City Borough of Education is renting from religious institutions. They're renting from Catholic churches, and they have public schools right in Catholic facilities, and I think it's a good decision. But why is it okay, and why would the children not get confused in a Catholic school and a Catholic church, a Catholic building, having a New York City public school there, and somehow they will get confused in a public school?
I had read a quote that you said the mayor was anti-religion. Do you think he is, or do you think you and he simply have a disagreement on a constitutional question?
Gary, I guess I'm getting older. I stopped listening to what people say, and I'm watching what people do. Back in 9/11 memorial service, a tradition here in the United States is to allow for a moment of invocation, to have the clergy to show up. Recently, in the mosque, as you know, there was a covert operation. There was nothing to incite that. There was nothing to lead these covert operations by the New York City, New York Police Department. We had the whole night shop situation. They were not allowing public school, churches and other houses of worship to meet. The crisis pregnancy centers, many of them were Christians and Catholics, and they were trying to, to push a bill through the mayor to have them closed down. So, all of this in 6 months, Gary. Mm-hmm. I mean, with so many issues that we have failing schools, we have SAT scores that have been going down the last 7 years, we have senior centers closing down, we have a array of big issues here. Why are you picking religious people who are volunteering and being a contribution to the community?
Is there a constitutional question involved that a school can't favor one religion, and frankly, it can be you say that maybe, it's an isolated incident that a child would see one thing or another, although I do say that your idea that, well, if a school is using a synagogue or a church, right, why wouldn't they be just as confused there? Right. But is there a constitutional question involved?
I don't think so, Gary. I think sometimes people get confused with this little phrase, separation of church and state. It's actually a little phrase that James Madison wrote in a letter. It is not spelled out that way in the Constitution. What the Constitution prohibits is for the government to have an establishment of religion. The government is not establishing a religion. That was a reactionary posture by the founders of this nation against the Anglican Church, the Church of England, in England. And so rightly so, we don't want that to take place here. But these houses of worship are paying rent just like everyone else, and so therefore they're not essentially here, and fundamentally they're not supporting a particular religion. They should give everyone this opportunity. Here's the other thing: every court, circuit court throughout the nation has favor in the side of houses of worship. We're the only state that went 2-1. It could have went the other way.
Well, it was the Supreme Court that basically chose not to take the case, which,
right,
as I said at the outset, simply allowed this situation to occur. I know that you're working legislatively kind of behind the scenes to take the question out of the mayor's hands. Maybe you can just inform the people about it. I guess the idea is for you to have a state law, and then that way, of course, the city doesn't have a say in the matter.
And if people want to find out more about it, they could go to www.righttoworship.com and how they could get involved. But what we're doing, I introduced a piece of legislation, resolution in the City Council, calling upon the state legislators to pass a bill, and we have two bills, one by Senator Golden, one by Assemblyman Nelson Castro, which will overturn and change Educational Law 414, and it will essentially allow all houses of worship to have the same privileges that other nonprofits do.
Let's just talk. I know we have those other issues, but it's a fascinating question, and I people may want to dispense with constitutional questions, but I think they're important. And you, of course, as a preacher in your other work, in your
right,
other mission, about the whole idea of church and state. What did you think of Senator Grisanti of Buffalo saying that even though he personally didn't agree with the marriage equality bill, and it violated his own personal beliefs, but he thought that it was his responsibility as a legislator to put that aside because he couldn't, from a legal perspective, justify voting against it, so he ended up being one of the major swing votes to pass that act. Did you think he did the right thing? And frankly, if you were in that spot, what would you have done?
Yeah, these are matters of conscience. I think that people need to follow their own conscience. They need to follow what they believe. will represent the people in their particular district. When someone is being voted on, they're being voted really on their values, because the values will dictate what kind of legislation will dictate what's right and wrong, consider right and wrong. And so I think that this is a matter that in individual districts, when people vote for a particular person, they need to take into account that if I vote for that person, they will represent what they put for as a position, as a platform.
Have you thought about what you might do if that were to come to you? If there was a Marriage Equality Act, and would you lay aside your very heartfelt religious beliefs and say, well, my district wants me to do this?
You know, as a matter of fact, my district, which is overwhelmingly African American Latino, is a district where most people oppose gay marriage. And so, and I think that was part of the reason I was voted in. Mm-hmm. And so I do believe in civil unions. I not one that is for a gay marriage. You know, there's a lot of strong arguments in both sides, but I'm one for traditional marriage, and we got to be careful which role, as we redefine. One of the biggest arguments are, well, what's to prohibit then the polygamous? I mean, why?
Well, I mean, there is a law, of course, against that. I mean,
right.
I don't
and there was a law.
I don't know that belongs in this dialogue.
Right.
But you know, to me, the question was an interesting one for someone like you who has strong felt religious beliefs, but you believe your district would have really pushed you to go in that direction.
Definitely.
All right, well, let it go.
The research,
we can
actually
pursue it, but did you want to answer?
The research clearly show that the African American, Latino, and Asian cultures tend to favor a traditional marriage and not gay marriage. I mean, the research is plainly out there.
All right, let's move forward. People want to talk about the Kingsbridge Armory. Last time you were here, which was a little while back, you expressed concern that the Armory process was too slow. You were very concerned because you wanted jobs, and you wanted jobs for district. So you said, you know what, I would have gone with the retail center, but the borough president decided this was going to be another way, so I'm okay with it, but I still want the jobs and I want development. With the city's announcement of the new RFP, are we getting closer, and do you feel comfortable that we're in a good spot as far as the Armory right now?
I believe that we are in an excellent spot right now. Recently, as a matter of fact, we're about to pass a living wage bill. The speaker made an announcement just last week, and so we're in a good position. That's not going to become an issue, and I was not about to make that the issue. I don't think it's fair to ask a particular developer to have living wages where every other development does not have living wages. I mean,
even though they accept public funding.
Even though they say public funding, because if that was the case, then make it fair. You see, I'm about fairness, and I think it should be all across. And the last thing that we want to do right now in this day and age is to scare developers. Developers and people who deal in this field, they're very nervous as to where they want to put their investment. So we have an ideal situation right now where we have a couple of companies out there that are very interested in coming back to the Armory. I sat down with, this all began when I sat down with the commissioner of the EDC, Commissioner Seth Pinsky. I sat down with him and I told him the living wage was not going to become no longer the stumbling block as far as I was concerned. And the reason why is because as long as I held to that, we were going to end up with a lemon that we couldn't make lemonade out of.
Do you think that a deal was cut with the borough president to say, you know what, back off the living wage, we'll compromise on that, and then then the mayor said, you know what, I'll take care of the Armory for you. We'll endorse a new RFP for the Armory, and you let somebody else handle the living wage.
Yeah, I don't think so, because the living wage bill it's going to get voted on and it's going to pass, and we have a good amount of council members who are going to. They have signed on to, I think the last count was 29. We do need 34 to override the mayor, and I'm pretty sure that the mayor probably is going to vote it on.
So you think the living wage bill will pass?
I believe that it will.
So, and you don't think there was a quid pro quo there?
No, not at all.
The borough president will be
Yeah.
here on the 27th. I'll ask
You
him
could
the same
ask
question.
him, but
Okay.
look, that's not what I smell, and I'm very real. So I would have told you if I felt that it was, but I just don't see that.
What do you want to see in the Armory? There are a number of ideas, the velodrome idea, the skating rink idea, movie theaters. I mean, what would you like to see come down the pike and ultimately be there?
Ultimately, I want a development that will bring economic development, that will have youth in mind. This is something that I've been fighting for.
Activities or development in some form.
Yeah, of some form. And there's a couple of projects right now. One that is gaining traction is to have the largest ice skating complex in the world. It will be the Yankee Stadium of hockey and ice skating. And I know some people will say, well, you know,
Bronx kids don't ice skate. I know that's coming.
But the reason why they don't ice skate is because we don't have ice skating complex. And Philadelphia is a perfect example of that. What you have in Philadelphia, once ice skating was introduced in a community, a lot of the kids exchange basketball for ski.
Are there enough
hockey
jobs
ski.
in managing a facility like that to justify this huge undertaking?
This particular group that I know of that is very interested in this project have told us that they will have 300 living wage jobs. And so, and most of those jobs will stay with people who live in the community.
Irrespective of the fact that they might not be forced to do so through a living wage legislation? In other words, we understand
Yes.
a retailer in this compromise legislation would not have to pay a living wage, but they would say, you know, we want to do it because we want the support of the Bronx. It's the right thing.
Actually, I have seen it in writing and sign and deliver that all of the jobs will be living wage.
Did you think the Speaker and Councilmember Capel, your colleague, compromised too much to get a living wage bill passed?
You know, sometimes that's the whole thing that sometimes people don't understand. Sometimes you're in a worse situation trying to get to a great situation, and so you have to go from really bad to good to better than good to great. I think this is going in the right direction. Would I have liked to see more in this bill? Certainly, but it's a step in the right direction. Sometimes we have to take baby steps.
What ultimately do you think will come of the living wage legislation, and what do you think its impact will be? We had talked about this way back when. I talked about it with a number of guests, that you know what, we're talking the difference between $7.25 and maybe $10.15 or $10.30 an hour. We know it's an increase, and for many people that means something, but really living wage is not quite the definition of what $10.35 or $10.50 an hour is. Right. Will this have any impact, or is this really kind of a nice political move to say, well, okay, we got this done, now let's move on?
I think it's a foundation, and now we have to build the columns. We got to build the house, the living wage house, but look, it's going to change the economic base for 300 people. Those are 300 people who are going to be making at least 1.5 times more of what they're currently making. That means they're going to purchase more things. That means they're going to have to hire business. They're going to have to hire more people. You know, there's just a cycle. There's a benefit of people making more money.
You were concerned about it scaring or potentially scaring away development. There's talk about Fresh Direct coming to the Bronx, and that if this wasn't grandfathered in under the old system, we wouldn't have a chance to get it. Are you concerned that the way the legislation is written now, it still will scare some from developing in the Bronx, and goodness knows we need every bit of development
No, I don't think so, because it's light enough. It's light enough to be appealing. It's manageable enough. Right now, there's over 200 cities across the United States that have implemented a living wage bill, and we know that it did not affect attracting new businesses. But I was also conscious of the fact that, and what I'm really addressing is that one particular building is being asked to do something that no other building is being asked of. That's
You're
just
talking about the Kingsbridge Armory.
The Kingsbridge Armory, and that's just a formula for failure.
Yeah,
and
you were concerned about that. You expressed it on this show, and frankly, while many fell into step, you said, listen, I understand the values being attempted here, but you were still concerned that we had that big empty building in your district.
Indeed, it's just sitting vacant. It's not being a powerhouse in the community. And I believe that once we have whatever project comes in and development comes in, that it's going to be a magnet for resources, magnet for jobs. It's just going to have a positive effect in the community.
Jane is telling me we have a call. I don't know who that is, but whoever it is, come on the show. We're happy to have you. So let's bring on the first phone caller. Who is that?
Hey,
go ahead.
Hey, Gary, can you hear me?
It's Mark from Pelham Parkway.
That is I, yes.
All right, Mark, go ahead.
Good. Councilman, I've heard these same stories before with Yankee Stadium, and we know how well they've taken over the parks.
What stories are you referring to that you've heard
and
before?
And we've seen this with the Gateway Mall, with development. The problem is...
No, but wait, Mark, I want to be clear. What story do you find similar between what you've heard?
Because whenever we're going to co-finance, we're going to put finance money into it. I sat at a meeting...
Public money,
you with the Armory that I believe the councilman was at about a year and a half ago. And the most interesting thing is the gentleman from Kaufman Studios, when they asked him how much would he be willing to pay for it, he came out and said, no, I want you to fix it up and I'll run it for you. And then he came out saying how good the film industry is, but it's very specialized jobs. And I stood up and asked him, would he be willing to set up a training program? And the guy from the union said, no, we have to import. We're running at 100%, so we have to import our brotherhood from other states. But
so Mark, let's just go back. You had been on our show and advocated that we should have a sound studio and a sound stage there. Is that what you're still advocating now?
I'm still advocating. I think because if you look at film production is up in New York, that the studios, every studio in Brooklyn, they all want to expand. The New York City area, the five boroughs.
So Mark, I just want to summarize. So basically, you're advocating to the council member that if he sees something for a film studio or a soundstage coming across his desk, he should say, you know what, this is a good idea.
It is a good idea if they can get a training program in. Because
right,
$10 to me...
There's no point in doing it and then hire people from New Jersey. All right.
No, right, exactly. Worse, they'll hire people from Atlanta and L.A., where the film business is down.
It's even worse in New Jersey?
But
I got it. Council member, what are your thoughts about the...
Look, I said, thank you, Mark, for that question. It's a valid question. It's a good question, and I'm glad that people are very interested in this project. But I said, as the chair of the technology committee, and I have sat down with the media department of the mayor of New York, and here's the question I keep asking. Why is it that local people, especially people who comes from our neighborhoods surrounding Kingsbridge and neighborhood, cannot get into the film industry? They tell me, well, we have set up a program, a pager program. That's as far in as we could get in. It's a very enclosed union. They don't allow anybody else to come in. And he's right. They said they are at capacity, but as of right now, see, I'm watching what people do, not what they're going to promise. The other thing is that this particular project that I'm seeing right now, the ice skating sports complex, which is going to include basketball as well and other sports as well, that they are willing to pay for the entire project. $200 million. It's not going to cost the city a dollar.
So this is not what Mark was concerned about, is this idea of public and
exactly.
private.
So there's not going to be
and listen, we'd love a training program that would get people into the film industry or whatever, but in this case, potentially the lead in your mind is something that won't need that kind of consideration. Our friend Bob from Riverdale joins us. Hi, Bob. Also the Bronx News as well. Of course, he has that column there. Hi, Bob. How are you?
Okay. I'm going to give the question to the councilman about the temporary ice skating rink proposed for Van Cortlandt Park.
Okay.
Now, it's changed. It's changed again. There was temporary...
Although that's not in his district, but it is a civic question that you can ask. Go ahead.
Well, I'll show you why. There were permanent structures put in. It's changed again. We had a stand
Bob,
inside
I
the
know
stadium because
what
it
is
was so
the
noisy.
question you want to
now,
ask?
Now, the mayor says that people of the Bronx will be able to use this rink because it's right next to the one train.
Bob, we know the issues. What's the question?
What does the councilman know about this temporary ice skating rink slated for Van Cortlandt Park? and how many of his constituents will take the number one train to get to this
Okay.
ice skating rink.
Are you aware of it? The idea is near the 242nd Street train station. The city is talking about putting an ice skating rink there.
Yeah, I as far as I know, the plan was completely scratched. There were many people on both sides of the argument, and the city hall basically said, you know, we don't want to be in the middle of this fight. And
The very latest is I saw a notice that they were going to hold a hearing on February 6th.
Okay.
And if it was in your district, I'd be bugging you about it.
Right,
But I don't want to
It's
spend a lot
outside
of time.
of my district. Right now, I have a big project called the Armory.
Well, let's talk about something totally different. You were put on a task force. You're part of a gun
Yes.
task force, and I know fighting crime is very important to you, and limiting the number of guns is very important to you. Tell me what the activities are of that task force.
Well, the purpose of the task force is to hear the experts, to hear the communities, and to come back with some practical ways, best practices that we already have in the city, and to make sure that they get funded. You know what's amazing, Gary? The last 2 years I've been signing Trump. Actually, before, even as I was running for the council, that we don't have a comprehensive prevention intervention gang program
In the city of New
in
York?
the city of New York.
Boy, I've been on this show for 17 years. I was not aware of that.
It
That sounds
shocks
rather
me.
incredible.
And gangs, and now they call them crews, they continue to grow and to grow and to grow. My very first question to the Commissioner Kelly was regarding the gang problem, and it's not receiving the attention that it's supposed to receive. Looking in the Bronx, right now in the city, we have 2 state sponsors programs that 2 years ago the governor just about decimated and cut the funding for them. They're called SNUG. Do you know that we don't even have one of those programs in the Bronx?
And so I'm assuming by your bringing that up, this is something that you're going to be attacking through the task force.
We want to make sure the funding is targeted for those type of programs that we know that work. The other thing that, Gary, that I'm encouraging other members to do, that I'm doing in my district.
You got to be quick because we are out of time.
Here we go.
ahead.
$1 million for security cameras, police security cameras that will go in my councilman district, and youth programs. We got to keep the young people busy.
They're all connected to the same thing you were talking about with the task force. Councilmember Fernando Cabrera, always a pleasure.
Likewise.
Never enough time. And we'll bring you back, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Folks, if you have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. Archives of Bronx Talk available at bronxnet.org. You click Bronx Talk on the right-hand navigation bar toward the bottom. Great lineup of shows coming up. Next week, January 30th, we take a look at managed care and whether access to health care in the Bronx is improved or not. February 6th, we go to the roads with the AAA. We'll talk about the rise in tolls, lighting on our roadways, and a number of other road traffic and street issues should relate to all of us. Then on February 13th, we can talk about that ice skating rink that Bob was talking about. A parks advocate will talk about a new golf course, the old golf course, parks funding or lack of it, the proposed skating rink, and a number of other Bronx parks issues. And make note, the borough president will be our guest, as I mentioned earlier, on February 27th. Lot to do. Bronx Talk Monday nights at 9 on BronxNet Channel 67 and Verizon Fios 33. Thanks to Jane, our producer, our director Michael, and Dina, and all the others who are around us here in the studio. And to you, good night.
So here are the keys.
Congratulations, it's officially yours. I'm sure you'll have many happy years here.
Except for you, because you'll be gone 3 years from now, struck down by the same disease that got your father. So you won't be around for them. And sadly, it could have been detected early with a simple test, but you didn't have it. Okay, who wants to check out the backyard?
For a list of tests every man should have, go to ahrq.gov.